Should I have my child's genetics done? Well, there's no downside to having a DNA test, a functional test done on your child, whether it's an infant, whether they're 5 or 6 years old. The only difference would be what would be recommended for a child as compared to a teenager or compared to an adult for diet and supplementation. But knowing it early gives that advantage of knowing what would be most beneficial from diet, food, exercise, if they're going to be involved in sports. There's a lot of aspects that you can manage with great measure of certainty if you have the pattern of your child's DNA. So just so you understand, when a child is born, they have 12,000 genes from each parent. So 12,000 from dad, 12,000 from mom. And if you know dad and mom's DNA, then you can make some reasonable assumptions about some of the needs that your child might have. But it would be better if you just had that test done and made that investment. It would be a great investment in your child's future, because DNA is something that is never going to change. It's going to remain the same throughout their life, and knowing some of those genetic variabilities when they're young can give them great advantages. So let's just think about some of the things that we do check children for, or that would be useful to know for children. Now, when they're infants, when they're being breastfed, their diet is basically made out of fat and sugar. So breast milk is highly fat and sugar content. They use that, they grow quickly. It's always amazing. You see somebody that's just brand new, and you see them 2 or 3 months later, and how much they've grown. And if they're being breastfed, they're getting this nutrients with fat, which is available to help our immune system, the mucus to allow our lungs to work, and our digestive tract, and there's all sorts of things going on inside. But the child will grow rather quickly at that stage because of the nutrition that's in that breast milk. And if they're not breastfed, then having casein protein and some of those nutrients added to their formula is a good idea. But what we look at in children is specifically their ability to methylate B vitamins. A lack of ability to methylate B vitamins in a child is often reflected in their cognitive function. So if they're having trouble focusing, if they're having trouble with social skills, if they're having trouble in different ways with cognition and behavior, then knowing whether they methylate the B vitamins, knowing whether they can actually accommodate protein, and do they have an extra protein need. These are things that can become very advantageous for you to know early on. Now, young children are not going to eat meat regularly like we do as adults. It's not part of if you've ever had a child, or if you're raising a child right now, you know that their taste buds go up and down, and some days they want to just eat steak, and then they don't want to eat steak for the next week, and they want to eat just different things. And there is variability, and some of that has to do with what's being expanded in their body at the time. And sometimes they're just not using as much protein, and then sometimes they're having a growth spurt and they need more protein. And so children do have a variability. But as they get older and they get into the young teenage years, this is where knowing their DNA becomes really advantageous. Do they have a high protein need, and do we need to focus in on that need? And I can give you an example even from our own children, knowing that one of them had a really high need for protein and didn't like protein. So we had to figure out magical ways to get that individual to eat protein. So protein pancakes, protein muffins, protein different things in the food to hide the protein. But it was very necessary for that individual to have protein, even to this day, because once again, those genetics are not going to change. Also, the methylation of B vitamins. So if you're poor at methylating B9 and B12, you're going to have more challenges with school. You're going to have more challenges with focus, learning to read, learning to write, learning math, learning these skills. So there's so many advantages to having a child's DNA done early. When it comes to fitness and when it comes to sports. So when we do functional DNA, we also check their fitness genes. And we can tell if they have, less power and sprint activity or less intensity from a genetic point of view. And then you can gear exercise programs that help them to change the output of those genes significantly as they grow. So there's many, many benefits. The largest benefit, of course, is knowing if your child has the ApoE4 gene. If your child has the ApoE4 gene, then they're going to be more subject to inflammation, more subject to many of the childhood diseases, and more subject to, in later life, things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So if I was giving people advice, which apparently I'm doing on this, what I'm doing here, I would have people have their child checked for two things. One is their methylation ability, and the other is, do they actually have the APO4 gene? Because those have the most impact on growth, they have the most impact on our cognitive function, etc. as we get older. So should you have your child's DNA done? I'm going to leave it in your hands, but it is a great investment. You will get great information that will serve you and serve your child for many years to come.